Hello YouTube, it's the Drunken Kobold here today with a product review, retro product review actually. The basic game from Dungeons & Dragons 2006. There was one released in 2004 that is affectionately referred to as the Black Dragon Edition. This one updated the game rules for 3.5, includes a blue dragon miniature, 3 new PCs, and a different story. This is the equivalent of a starter set in the 3.5 era. So before we open this up, let's check out what's on the back. Enter a world of adventure and imagination. Become a hero. Take on the role of a fierce warrior, a mighty wizard, a powerful cleric, or a stealthy rogue, and embark on a heroic quest. Explore dangerous dungeons, fight terrifying monsters, and discover wondrous treasures. Together with your bold companions, prove you've got what it takes to face the risks and collect the rewards in the greatest fantasy role-playing game of all time. This box contains 12 pre-painted miniatures, heroes, and monsters, 4 double-sided dungeon tiles, 4 hero booklets, 1 Dungeon Master booklet, 6 dice, 1 counter sheet, and 1 advanced rulebook. So without further ado, let's get this opened up and see what is inside. All right, so the first thing you see here is the basic game sheet that says read this first. Read this first. This Dungeons & Dragons basic game allows 1 Dungeon Master and up to 4 players to explore mysterious dungeons and engage in challenging adventures in a medieval world of monsters and magic. So we're actually going to do the setup for this as we read it. Setup. 1 player decides to play the Dungeon Master and selects the Dungeon Master book. Up to 4 other players each select one of the character books: Fighter, Rogue, Cleric, and Wizard. These characters form your adventuring party. Place the dungeon tile labeled 1A in the center of the table. Place the dice in easy reach of all players. Place the 4-player character miniature figures on the squares in the dungeon tile as shown on the diagram below. Place 2 door counters on the squares on the dungeon tile shown below. Use the counters that say door on the back. Put the other dungeon tiles, the advanced rulebook, and the other miniature figures back in the box. You won't need them yet. Give the box to the Dungeon Master. Next, each player should read through his or her character book while the Dungeon Master reviews the quick play and first encounter sections of the Dungeon Master book. When the Dungeon Master is ready, your first D&D adventure begins. All right, so the next thing that you see in here are these color-coded dice. Much like the early days of D&D, this is very nostalgic having these color-coded dice. As I mentioned in my Pathfinder 2e video, seeing these is just absolutely great. I do like that in this box set, they actually do serve a mechanical purpose. The game actually does show that the dice are supposed to be color-coded so that players can easily determine which die is which. Next, you have your player booklets. There are 4 of them. 1 for Dothel, the Dwarf Cleric. 1 for Karn, the Human Rogue. 1 for Lannon, the Elf Wizard. And Regdar, the Human Fighter, returns from the 2004 game. Each of these books has the color-coded dice system in the front so that you can determine which die is which. explains which actions you can take on your turn, what reactions you can take on your opponent's turn, what actions your opponents will be taking, and then does have these character sheets on the back that are simple, bare bones, and extremely easy to understand. That is the same for all 4 character sheets. So I do love that these were absolutely great products and very, very new player friendly. Next is our Dungeon Master booklet. The Dungeon Master booklet explains the actions that your players can take on their turns, as well as the actions that you can take on your turn as the Dungeon Master. On the back, it explains the Dungeon Master basics, including which initiative order to play the game in. Rather than roll for initiative, the starting game actually starts with players automatically having first initiative and actually moving down the line in order of Karn, Lannon, Regdar, and Dothel, and then the monsters. You can choose which order you play your monsters in, that doesn't matter. It explains which actions you take, attack rolls, skill checks, and ability checks. It has how to determine success, and it has how to target numbers. And then it also explains what to do on the monster's turn. As mentioned in the startup, there are these tokens, and I accidentally just punched 2 of them out. They are doors, locked doors, trapped doors, regular chests, trap chests, lock chests, healing potions, and armor and spell scrolls. These get punched out, much like these tokens below have here, and they are put on your game board as markers that don't necessarily represent miniatures. When it comes to spell scrolls, weapons, armor, you can actually give these to your player because on the back it has descriptions of what they are intended to be. I think that having the descriptions on the back for some of these is a little redundant. For instance, a door is a door. You don't need to mark that it's a trapped door or a locked door or just a regular door. When it's face down on your sheet like this, so that you just see the door icon, you just know it's a door. And since the Dungeon Master book describes whether it's locked, trapped, or wide open, I feel that having those markers on the back do unnecessarily bog things down. That's just my opinion. I still like that these tokens are really nice and really clean. Next is the Advanced Rulebook. The core game works on milestone. It doesn't work on experience. By the time you have finished the first game, you are level 2. This brings you into having a level 2 character that is ready for 3.5 and explains the spells and actions you can take. In addition, it also expands on the adventure that is included in the Dungeon Master book. The Dungeon Master book only has 5 encounters. This has the 6th encounter. These are what the character sheets look like inside the advanced rules. They are easily transferable to your 3.5 character sheets. This adventure also, I have found after reading it, works really good converted into 5e. So if you wanted to, you could easily convert this if you pick it up into a 5e adventure that still works just as well for your new players who are ready to learn the game. We actually have this survey card that you could have mailed in 2006. There was no reward for doing so, but there was the option to be contacted by Wizards of the Coast to receive other promotional offers that necessarily wouldn't have been released to game stores or big box stores. Since this actually is still the Wizards of the Coast P.O. box in Renton, I kind of want to fill this out and just troll Wizards as to why they're receiving mail from 2006, but that's just me. Next, we'll go into the miniatures for this set. First is Karn the Rogue. Karn the Rogue also could pass as a Ranger miniature. There isn't anything that clearly distinguishes here a rogue. There are no like visible daggers or short swords. And since longbows are not the typical weapon of a rogue, I definitely would not look at this and think rogue. Next is Dothel the Dwarf Cleric. Dothel, it's a cleric. One thing about these miniatures is they are extremely poorly painted. Even in the Dungeons and Dragons miniatures era, for here on out referred to as DDM, the miniatures here were very, very poorly painted. Not a lot of detail, not a lot of like texture. They were just generic, poorly sculpted, poorly painted plastic that was extremely flimsy and had really flimsy bases. So there is that. Next is Lannan, our elf wizard. Once again, nothing to distinguish that she is a wizard other than perhaps this very, very small wand, which actually, because of the way it's flexed, looks like a short bow. There's also nothing to distinguish her as an elf other than perhaps her really, really long golden hair, but she could easily pass as a human miniature as well. Next is Regdar, our human fighter. I have to say, like, his armor is just really, really bad. It almost looks like he's wearing a footed metal onesie as opposed to actually having armor. The sheath for the sword is much, much bigger than the sword and is also reversed. It's very poorly placed on the miniature. And like I said, the sculpt is just really bad overall. These are not miniatures that have stood the test of time by any means whatsoever. Next, we will go into our goblin miniatures. There is a melee goblin and a ranged goblin. These goblins are brown skinned, similar to the goblins that you find in D&D 5e. They're the correct size. The sculpts are a little whack in my opinion, but you know, in a pinch, these are really nice goblins. If you want to run this adventure to expose players who are new to 3.5 or even update it to 5e, there are much better miniatures in the Icons of the Realms lineup than these guys. That's just like straight up. Next is our Harpy miniature. This is supposed to be a Harpy. I don't like this sculpt at all. I also don't like that, you know, her club just kind of looks like a raw baguette. I feel that the detail of Harpies has gotten so much better, and like there are so much better sculpts out there that, yeah, no, you could definitely have a better miniature than this. But once again, it does come with the miniature, which is a huge plus as opposed to the other starter sets. Next is our orc. This is actually my favorite miniature out of this entire set. Why? He's actually a sturdy miniature. He is not like super flexible rubber plastic. He's sturdy. He's got a lot of really good details. And, you know, like, he's overall a really nice miniature. The one thing I want to comment on, he is furry as hell. So if you don't want him to be an orc, he could definitely serve as a bugbear. So no, the fact that this miniature is versatile, is well detailed, and actually has a really nice paint job to it, I have to say I really, really like this miniature. Next is our skeleton miniature. It looks like Johnny Lawrence from Karate Kid. That is, yeah, it looks like Johnny Lawrence from Karate Kid. If they had just like not cut out the ribs here and left it black there, it would be his Karate Kid costume. It's just white that has been painted with little tiny lines of black. There is hardly any texture in here to differentiate between each of the bones. So this is more humorous than anything to me. And even in this era, there were much, much better skeleton miniatures that you could have used. Next is a miniature that I've actually been trying to get one for a while. Every time I go to get one, they're sold out. When they're back in stock, can't get it. So I'm glad that I finally have a miniature for 5e, even if it isn't the best miniature, and that is the Gargoyle. The Gargoyle is a simple one-tone gray that has the details etched into it. It actually looks like a stone statue. Is it the best sculpt in the world? Hell no. Could it have more detail or even like two-tone grayscale? Absolutely. But the fact that this looks like a traditional menacing gargoyle is actually pretty cool for me, and I think I'll definitely be fielding this in my 5e games. Next is our Minotaur. And I have to say, this guy's like proportions are way, way off, even for a Minotaur. He has absolutely tiny legs, a massive sword, and a huge, huge upper and lower abdomen, as well as a disproportionately shaped head that doesn't resemble anything cow or bull-like other than its horns. It almost looks like a Japanese yokai rendition of what you would expect for a Minotaur. So this miniature, the fact that he's flimsy and that he's like poorly sculpted, poorly painted, like it's almost comedic, this miniature. And next and last but not least is our Blue Dragon. Now, this is an accurate to sculpt Blue Dragon from the 3.5 era. While its paint job is okay, it's bad. It's just really bad. And like a lot of the details in the head are just kind of just, rather than actually being there, are just implied by being painted. I actually kind of like this miniature, and I almost want to repaint it to just kind of bring it up to speed, but it's overall a really solid young dragon miniature. I really, really do like this guy. My first impression looking at him, though, actually reminded me of Pathfinder green dragons. This is the Gargantuan dragon from Pathfinder, and compare him to our blue dragon, you can definitely see that there are similarities in their sculpt, particularly in that massive horn on their nose. All right, and then the last product that we are going to be looking at in here is the dungeon tiles. These have very similar artwork to the dungeon tiles that are found in Dungeon Tiles and Dungeon Tiles Reincarnated, as well as dungeon tile kits like Gasmore Manor, etc. The fact that they are all labeled in the corners like 1A, 1B, means that it is very easy to determine which tile you are going to be using for your game. They are fully compatible with Dungeon Tiles and Dungeon Tiles Reincarnated. So if you want to use these as the base of a dungeon and build into a bigger dungeon, you definitely can. The other thing about these is, other than a couple minor spots on here, these actually convert really well into being built with Warlock tiles. If people want, I will build these dungeons here as warlock tile builds on the table so that you can see them. And if I do, I will include updated miniatures over these old ones here. Overall, the product is extremely simple. It's extremely bare bones, but it does the job right of being an easy to learn product. If 3.5 gets a lot of flack for being overly complicated, and Pathfinder gets just as much flack for 1E being as complicated. So if I wanted to teach people who have never played 3.5 before, this is the kind of product to do it. Now, the downside is this has been out of print for years. Wizards of the Coast will obviously have no intention of bringing this product back to the modern lineup. And as such, there is no way to obtain these products for MSRP. You are looking at a minimum of $100 for a complete set with all the tokens, all the miniatures, and all the books in mint condition. So where would this stand if Wizards of the Coast was to re-release this for the player base who wants to learn 3.5? This is a 10 out of 10 product. I do not care that the miniatures look bad. The fact that it came with miniatures when modern D&D products don't even come with miniatures at all, not even pawns. This is just absolutely great that it comes with these. One thing that it does mean, though, is that adventures are not as fleshed out in the 3.5 starter set as they are in, say, 5e or Essentials kit, where miniatures are not part of the game. You're looking at hundreds and hundreds of miniatures to be able to run the starter set. I believe that if every encounter was to be maxed out in starter set, you're looking at about 250 miniatures. Whereas this only needs 12 miniatures to be run from beginning to end. But the adventure, it's a solid dungeon crawl. It's easy for new players and new dungeon masters to navigate. It's nostalgic for old. So if you can pick this up for cheap, I highly, highly recommend doing so. How would I like to see this in the 5e era? 5e has focused a lot on storytelling. Even if you look at the modern starter set and essentials kit, there is a lot of roleplay opportunity and there is a lot of story. So it gets fleshed out also with more encounters and more creatures per encounter. So moving this to 5e would feel a little out of place, but it would be a very good adventure to start. Like I said, for the time period that it came in, definitely a 10 out of 10 product. This is what starter sets should be. Fleshed out enough that it's entertaining, but bare bones enough that it's simple and does not turn new players away due to complexity. I never got to buy this product in the old days. I may try and run this if some new players are interested in running 3.5. So I'm going to actually have to pass the buck off to the audience here. And for those who played it in the back in the day, what were your opinions on playing it? Was it as simple as it appears to me in the modern era, or was it complex for its time? Let me know in the comments down below. If you feel I deserved it, please leave a like and consider subscribing. It would mean the world to me. Cheers, and may the rolls be with you.